Ladies and gents, we are back on the bank, and today I'm really looking forward to our little session. We're back at Yoke Hill Farm. If you remember, Joe and we shot a video on one of the other lakes a couple of years ago, and it was absolutely rigid with fish. So thought I'd come back again. This lake we're on today is called Rigby's. Now the owner has told me, get yourself on Rigby's Lake. It's fishing really well. I've never even seen the lake before, so I don't really know what I'm up against, but I'm told that there's barbel, the odd carp, some F1s, skimmers, eyed, a real mixed bag of fish, something that I absolutely love fishing for. So I've come armed today with a really simple plan of attack. I've got with me some ground bait and I've got some maggots as well. You know, both really simple but effective fish catching baits. I've had a quick plumb up. Let me just talk through where I've chosen and why I've chose those little areas that I've chosen. First spot is across the far side. Obviously this is a bit of a snake style lake, a sort of a canal style cutting. For me, at the start of a session, those fish are naturally going to be over that far side. Obviously we've been clattering around, banging the van doors, chucking our nets in, making a load of noise on the bank. Those fish are just going to push across, and this time of year the water's cold, those fish, they're going to want to be across there, at least for the first half of the session, I'd say. So I've plumbed up and found the deepest water that I possibly could, as far across as I could. And actually we've got a really steep shelf across there today, so not even sort of a metre off the far bank, we've got a full depth of the lake, which is around 4 foot. The other line that I've chose to fish, because we want to keep things nice and simple, at least to start with. We might add a few things later on in the session once I get a feel for the day. The other line that I've chosen to fish is top kit +2, away from the bank a little bit, but it's in 3 foot of water, something like that. So that is going to be my attacking line. Second half of the session, I'll be feeding that by hand, feeding maggots by hand, trying to catch fish and sort of catch fish fast, attract loads of fish there. And that for me that's going to be my barbel line, because I've got a few little whips down there and I think barbel love those little whippy style rushes. Starting the session, obviously I've got that ground bait. All I'm going to do, I'm going to feed a small amount of ground bait. I've got the big pot on. I'm going to feed a small amount of ground bait, like a conker of ground bait. I'm not squeezing it rock hard. A few maggots, 15, 20 maggots, not a lot of bait, and that is going to go across on that far line. What I want to do is feed the line that I'm going to fish. I want to feed that first, because obviously I want to just give that a few seconds just to settle. I've got a marker on the far side, which is a bit of dead branch, and then I've got a marker obviously that butts up to my hand, which is the join of a section. And it's like I say, about a metre off the far side. And I'm just going to put in that ground bait and those few maggots. And then, because I don't know how good the session is going to be, I'm just going to feed a little bit of bait down this side, because I might want to go on it a little bit earlier, we'll see. So I'm just going to do sort of the same, a little bit less ground bait this time. And I'm not going to squeeze it as hard. So I want that ground bait to almost break up halfway down rather than get to the bottom and break up. I'm just trying to create a little bit of attraction in that area. Remember, I'm going to be feeding it by hand, this shorter line, so it's not really an issue. Probably just, again, I've got a marker. The sun's going to be awful today. It's a beautiful day, but I think the sun on the water is going to make things awkward when it comes to looking at our floats. Let me talk to you quickly about plumbing up, because what I want to do is make sure I'm fishing, and by that I mean I'm fishing on the bottom. There's no point plumbing up and trying to get everything so perfect that you just see a little bit of your float bristle when you're plumbing up. The trouble is, lake beds aren't as flat as everyone thinks. Obviously there's a bit of ripple on it today. I don't want that hook bait to be sitting off the bottom at any one point, so I like to lay probably an inch of line on the bottom, especially with maggots. Fish grab onto them a little bit, your bites are really positive, so you can lay a little bit more line on the bottom than you can with pellets maybe. So I always make sure I'm laying an inch of line on the bottom. That makes sure that my hook bait is on the bottom, it's nice and still, and I'm fishing effectively. Rigs for today. Both rigs feature 4x12 floats. They're actually Malman Dusties, 1.5mm bristle. We're fishing maggots, a smaller bait, so 1.5mm bristle. Something nice and visible though, that's a hollow bristle. I like to use a 2mm bristle when I'm fishing with heavier baits, but as I say, smaller the bait, thinner the bristle for me. 4x12 float, I've shotted the rig with number 10 slot shot, and they're just spaced, strung out through the bottom quarter of the rig. So we can get the bait down, but there's still a bit of freedom down there. We can lay the rig in, we can do all sorts with that rig where we're trying to catch the fish. There's no point having all your flirty shot all the way up the rig. We're trying to catch the fish on the bottom, so let's make sure all our weight on that rig is working in the bottom sort of like third of the rig. I've got a 4-inch hook length on today. Smaller the fish or shyer biting the fish, shorter the hook length. That means you can get that bottom shot right next to, well, quite close to the hook. 4-inch hook length, so I'll see bites quite quickly. That's 0.10. The hook's a size 18. Main line, we're using 0.14 just for robustness. And because we don't really know what we're up against today fish-wise, I've got a pink shock core in the pole. Hollow elastic, so if we do hook a big fish, we've got a chance of getting it out. But also, it's quite soft on the strike for those smaller fish. You know, I'm told we've got a real mixed bag in front of us today. Fishing-wise, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off by just simply shipping over to the far side where we put that little bit of bait. I'm going to put double maggot on. There's not many fish in the world that doesn't eat double maggot. We'll just see what happens. What I'm trying to do is just lay the rig out to the side. I'll let it fall and let that hook bait get maybe a foot off the bottom, and then slowly lower the rig in. We're not looking for a massive weight today. I think £60 won the match yesterday, so it's not a huge weight we're looking for, but I'm told we should get loads of bites, which at this time of year, that's what we want. Try and hold that bait nice and still, right over the feed. I always feel when we're fishing maggots and we're fishing for a mixture of fish and not necessarily carp or F1s, that it's not always instant action. Sometimes I have to build a peg up with some regular feeding, but that ground bait is hopefully the way to kick everything off. So I'll just lay that in again. A little indication then, that's a good sign. The sun's making seeing you float very awkward, but I'm not complaining about the sun at this time of year. I've been told we might catch a few barbel today, and I absolutely love barbel. One of my favourite fish. So if we catch a few of those, I'll be ever so happy. If this initial sort of like steady feeding approach doesn't work, what we'll end up doing is maybe putting a little pot on and topping up with a little pole mounted pot. There we go. Fish first drop. Let's see what he is. I think he's a little skimmer. Look at that. A little skimmer. That is a cracking start. Obviously shows there's a few fish around, a few fish feeding. I think what I'm going to do is I'll put that little pot on and just start dripping maggots in, and then we'll see how we go once we start dripping a bit of bait in, little and often feeding, but nice and accurately. So how I'm feeding the swim now is really nice, really simply. Double maggot on the hook, And then in this little pole mounted pot, I'm putting about 15 maggots. The crack is when you're fishing long with a little pole mounted pot is firstly, make sure your pot's got a little lid on it. Secondly, just before you ship out, just give it a dunk under the water. That means the maggots will stick to the side of the pot. So obviously when you ship out, you're less likely to bounce the maggots out. And obviously by the time you get out to where you're fishing, these little pots, these little grip flex pots have got holes in the side, so all your water's disappeared. Tap the maggots out, lay the rig in. I'm getting quite a few bites now. Last fish was a tiny little roach though, so that's not a great sign. But I'm getting a few bites. It could be a case of maybe topping up with ground bait again, but we'll see how this goes, just tapping in a few maggots. I don't want to go mad to start with, feeding loads and loads of bait, because as I say, it's only a little late. We've not got a lot of water to work with really, so I want to just make sure that we're taking it nice and softly and making the most of the swim. Little indication, there you go. Nice. This is definitely not a roach. So you can see just tapping a few maggots in has definitely helped. Obviously we used that ground bait to kick-start the swim. I've had a little carp, and this might be another little carp, but as I keep saying, there's everything in here, so you just don't know. It's a nice start. There we go, another little carp. Cracking little fish. Beautiful little fish, little mirror. Cracking little fish, look. I think what we'll do is we'll repeat the process, see if we can catch a few more of those little fellas. And then if it slows again, we'll probably have to do something else. Maybe, like I say, put another ball of ground bait in, or maybe feed a little bit more. But I think this is just a nice, controlled way of feeding to start with, especially early on in a session. So 2 maggots on the hook, 15 maggots in the pot, give it a nice little dunk, and away we go. I always like to keep the rig nice and still once it's in the water, especially early on in a session. I always think keeping your hook bait nice and still on the bottom is the way to go. You've set a trap, and now it's just up to the fish to come and find your hook bait. What I don't like to do is keep lifting and dropping the rig. Indication straight away then. I don't like to lift and drop the rig early on in a session. I just like to get a feel for the day, and occasionally, especially these smaller carp, they'll chase a bait, they'll snap at a bait that's lifted and dropped, but I just want to see what's happening, so I'm going to keep the rig nice and still. That bite then, that indication then was definitely a line bite, so again we could get indications from fish. Those maggots don't sink the fastest, so we could get indications from fish at sort of mid-depth attacking those maggots. As I always say, you want to pin your fish to the bottom if you can. That's where you've got to catch them. So let's feed in a way that we're going to pin the fish to the bottom. Little indications on the float. There's definitely a few fish grubbing around now. Let's see what this one is. He's not as big as the last fish. I wonder if he's an eyed or a little F1. Oh yeah, I think it's a cracking roach. Beautiful fish. Hooks fell out in the net. Look at that for a roach. Oh, nearly a pound. You'd want to be catching him on the river, let me tell you. Beautiful fish. So as I say, I'm going to keep repeating the process. Fill the pot, a few maggots, just drip feed those maggots into the swim. Take it from there. I'll probably touch base with you when things start to go a little bit wrong or we need to make another change. Well, this is where we're at, folks. My last two fish have been little roach, and I'm starting to miss the odd bite now, so I think we might get lucky and catch the odd bigger fish doing what we're doing, but I think it needs a little top up because it's the bigger fish we want to target. I think this is another skimmer or a roach, and we've had a few carp now, so we know there's those carp knocking around. There you go, there's another roach again. I mean, these are beautiful fish, but it'd be great if we could catch some quality as well. So I think what I'm going to do, and I sort of guessed this would happen, you know, is just top up with another little ball of ground bait. And it might be a case of topping up with a ball of ground bait and doing the same thing, rattling a few maggots over the top. So just another little ball of ground bait. The ground bait is swim stim black, and obviously mixed it when I've got here this morning. First thing I've done is mix the ground bait. I want to get as much water in that ground bait so it absorbs the water and it becomes really heavy, sinks to the bottom, acts as a really inert ground bait. So emptied a bag of ground bait into the bowl. A bag of ground bait takes a pint of water, so that's a good reference for you. So a bag of ground bait, added a pint of water to that ground bait, mixed it up, and what you'll have is a stodge that you just think, oh no, I've ruined my ground bait. Don't worry, 5-10 minutes later, you come back to it, riddle the ground bait, push the rest through a riddle. Any lumps that you've got, push it through a riddle, take your time, push it through a riddle, and you'll be left with a beautiful fine ground bait. And as you can see, it's sinking nicely. So that will settle on the bottom, create a nice little bed of bait for those fish to graze over. I think what I'll do is just have a spell not feeding the maggots and just relying on that ground bait as an attractor. Right, so lower that in, right over that ground bait. We've had a nice little flurry, but obviously it's early on in the session. You do tend to get a nice little flurry early on in the session of fish, and then they sort of like drift off a little bit. Another little fish look. I mean, it might just be a case of this is the fish that we're fishing for, but I would like to catch some better fish. What I'm going to do is hold off on the maggots for now and just go out again. Might be a case of me tapping in those maggots have attracted those smaller fish. Even so, it's nice to be busy. And presentation wise, if the wind does grab me and move the rig, I do like to lift the whole rig out and put it back in again. That ground bait has definitely done the trick. I'm getting indications now, but it's going to be tricky to work out how we're going to catch those better fish. So there we go. It's worked. Cut the maggots out and just relied on that ground bait and just slowed everything down a little bit, and we're attached to a much bigger fish. got to take my time because we're only using light gear. But he's definitely a bit bigger than those roach we were catching. If possible, I don't really like to use the puller bung when I'm fishing. It's just really to take up a bit of slack, and especially I don't like to pull it when the fish is running away from me. So it's literally just a case of when the fish is coming towards me, just to sort of power the elastic up a little bit faster really, I use the puller bung. So that fish is coming towards me now, so I can just take in a little bit of slack, and hopefully we'll net him first time. Always a beautiful barb, that's what we've come for. That is what we're after. Look at that for a fish. Ooh, jumping around. Look at that for a fish. Cracking fish, probably a pound and a half. Beautiful fish. That is what we're after. So what I'm going to do is just see if it's just ground bait the fish want now. Try and cut the maggots out, because I think that was just attracting a few of those smaller fish. So I'm going to put in a little ball of ground bait, go out and see if we can catch another little whiskered friend like that last one. So another little conker of ground bait going out. Bang on the money again, opposite those branches. I'm actually going to take this little pot off my pole because we don't need it. Two maggots on the hook. I'm hooking the first one through the thick end, second one through the thin end. It's only a small hook and I want to sort of leave plenty of the hook showing. Be beautiful if we caught a net full of those. Cracking little fish. Go tiny bites today. Really nice fishing though. I mean, every fish doesn't have to be a huge fish, especially this time of year. It's just nice to get some bites. The water is just starting to clear. Obviously when you visit these venues, I guess maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago it would have been chocolate, the water, but obviously now you probably see a foot down. You just see those fish are being less and less active as the water gets colder. But that is sort of the stamp of fish that I'm catching now, sort of like it's a pound and a half. Last couple of fish have been a little bit bigger maybe. You know, it's really nice fishing. It's a shame to come off that line, but I think we've got to try that shorter line and see whether we can really start putting a few fish together there. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what's congregated on that shorter line. I've got my little marker. The plan is not to feed any bait while the float's in the water. So what I want to do is I've got my hand in the tub ready, got some maggots in my hand, and hopefully when I hook a fish I can throw those maggots in, and that means that when I then put my rig back in after maybe a minute, 30 seconds of playing the fish, that bait would have settled on the bottom. The last thing I want to do is put my rig in, then introduce some bait right on top of it, because those maggots are going to take 10 or 15 seconds to hit the bottom. And I don't want to be getting indications on my float and potentially foul hooking fish that are chasing those maggots mid-water. So I want my maggots to be on the bottom. First bite of the day, bumped him. So I'll feed a bit of bait. Like I say, I want my maggots to be on the bottom by the time I reintroduce my rig. So everything might seem a little bit slower by doing it this way, but trust me, it works out better in the long run. So double maggot again. Didn't feel a bad fish, that felt a nice fish. So lay that float out, hand in the maggot tub, got a few maggots in my hand ready to go. Little indication. I mean, the bites across today have been really small, so obviously the lighter rig you use, the smaller the indications you're going to get, because that bottom shot is so light. But even so, I don't think these fish are moving around very much. I wonder if this is going to be a ground bait job down the edge as well. Obviously, one of the best methods in the summer is ground bait and maggots in the margins, and the fish love that ground bait, and this could just be a case of just scaling it down. There we go, as we say it. Could be a case of scaling it down and feeding some ground bait in the edge, but obviously just doing it with a bit more finesse. So in deeper water, feeding less bait, finer gear, you know, really scaling it down. But we've got one. As you can see there, I've hooked this fish and then fed those maggots. So now those maggots are sinking through the water. And if we get everything right, get all our timings right, a little sort of like, let's hold him up for you, little cruising F1 cross thingy, this guy. Cracking little fish. So hopefully if we get our timings right, it means those maggots are just settling on the bottom, and by the time we introduce our hook bait, there's a fish there waiting for us. That is the theory. Two maggots, just make sure the shotting is right. So I'm laying that rig in, pulling it against the shelf. Handful of maggots again, ready to feed. And I was hoping for a few barbel down there, but if every fish is like that, or a little carp, I'll be happy. Right, I'm making a decision. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start feeding ground bait there. Bites are taking just too long to come, so I'm going to start feeding a little ball of ground bait there and just do what we were doing across. They certainly love that ground bait across, so I think feeding a little ball down the edge has got to be the way. Let's try a single maggot this time, just to see if that makes a difference. So they're not the biggest fish in the world. Let's see if a single maggot manages to trick one. So I'm not going to feed any maggots this time, just rely on that ground bait. I think that's really important, sort of learning from your peg in general. So I think, is it a little barbel, or we've got our first better fish anyways, a little carp. Beautiful little fish. that ground bait is definitely the way to go. So what I'm going to do, this time I'm going to feed just a few maggots with that ground bait. Not a lot though, just maybe like, I don't know, 8 maggots, something like that. Just literally give the fish a small taste of what we're putting on the hook. Little tiny nugget of ground bait. Right over the spot. It's a double maggot. That has definitely been the best bait. Obviously we've tried single every now and again, but it just results in a little fish. So I think double maggot's the way to go. Lay it in over the top of that ball of ground bait. And with a short line you can be so precise. That's just a case of keeping everything nice and still, waiting for a fish to find that ground bait and hopefully find your hook bait lying right next to it. I mean, you're trying to sort of replicate a method feeder trap with a pole, and obviously because you see every single little indication, it's more effective than a method feeder. There we go. Didn't take long, did it? The difference it's made feeding ground bait in comparison to maggots is just unreal. And I don't think it's because they dislike maggots. I just think that the pulling power of sort of like a fish meal pellet based mix, while the weather's still reasonably, I'm not going to say warm, but it's not freezing cold. Obviously it's not winter, it's autumn, so we're not talking about freezing temperatures. They're so fast on that mix though, so fast on it. Looks like another nice little carp. There's a chunky little fella. God, he's a beauty. Not too... Look at his fins, beautiful orange fins. Look at that. Proper little pasty shape he was. So you can see, never forgetting to feed. Little ball of ground bait, just a few maggots, not many maggots at all, 6 maggots. The beauty of what we're doing is there's not much choice down there for the fish. So obviously we're feeding a little ball of ground bait, and those fish are going to see my maggots, hopefully, and that is going to be the target bait for the fish. See if we can repeat the process, go 2 in 2, which I think at this time of year is an achievement. Two in 2, folks. He's nearly done me behind the reeds. Straight through the reeds, but we managed to get him back. Oh, another one of those beautiful commons. Look at that, absolutely stunning fish that is. He's not the biggest fish in the world, but he is a stunning little fish. 2 for 2 on the margin line. What do you think to that? I think I'm going to carry on. I'm going to leave it there for you guys because it's just starting to drizzle. Don't want to knacker the camera. I think it's a lovely little fish to finish on. I'm going to carry on, see if I can fill my keep net. And until next time, tight lines.